My name is Elisa Santos. I'm from Portugal. I'm here to present you Temporary Occupations, a project that happened in Mozambique and Cape Verde. And I think I will start by the very beginning. I mean, 5 centuries ago. Of course, I'm joking, but you must understand that for a Portuguese, speaking of occupations, it's a very, very long story. And speaking of temporary can be a long discussion. Portugal was the first country occupying Africa in the modern era, and the last one recognizing its colonies' independence only 40 years ago. I have less than 10 minutes now, so I'll take just the last 4 years. In 2010, I was living in Maputo, and I proposed 6 artists, 6 Mozambican artists, to occupy public places with contemporary art. We made it in a response, I can say, in a reaction to the National Festival of Culture that didn't consider that kind of culture as even made by Mozambican artists, that kind of art, as national culture. We took everyday places, everyday live places, and we made it in a hotel, in the downtown market, in a bookshop, in a room of the Ethnographic Museum, and in a ruin in the main street. You see, it was very funny to see ordinary people facing contemporary art, the strangeness of contemporary art. In 2011, we decided to repeat the model with a new group of artists, 5, under the word precariousness. We faced a new problem. As I'm not Mozambican, as we didn't plan the event in advance, as occupations are not a formal institution, a formal organization, we couldn't find sponsors. But we made it, in a very precarious way, but we made it. In 2012, artists claimed for a new edition, but I was no longer in Mozambique, nor even in Africa, I was already in Portugal. Here I must say that for us, Occupations was always a project based on activism and art. The artistic scene in Maputo was very vibrant in terms of willing, of energy, but with a very low self-esteem, and artists fighting for surviving, fighting for the very basic conditions. So what we had to do was a project for discussion. People had to discuss, to make reflections on new ways of doing things in order to find their own strategies and not only obeying others' agenda. So we made the exhibition with the group under the theme Foreigners. So what we decided was to invite a group of Mozambican artists, like the years before, but that have been working or studying or living abroad. In one of the first meetings, it was very funny because the artists themselves called my attention to the fact that that group was mainly of white or mixed. And this was a very important thing because they were sure that would be assumed as a criteria. For this group, being accepted was already very difficult. They were foreigners in their own place. So by studying abroad, by working abroad, they are already the other. When we went to Mindelo, foreigners didn't seem to be a very emergent issue on the established discourse. Nationalism, racism, colonial traumas didn't seem to be a subject. After a debate with 7 artists, we found 4 different approaches. On migration to Europe, problems with visa, with passports and all that stuff, Migration inside the archipelago, a very big and old community of Senegalese that you could see but they didn't know, and the invisible city borders that limit the access of people to the points of decision, to the city center. All these become a very coherent speech on Mindelo presentation. What you are going to see is a little bit of a work of Rui Tenreiro. Rui Tenreiro is a Mozambican artist that made this movie for the 2012 presentation. He lives here in Stockholm. I see artists, unless they are a prime minister, I don't see them as a solver. I don't see them as solvers of political, economical problems. But I see them very prophetic. This work is, in a certain way, a reflection on Mozambican governance, on the way the power is used, on the way of the natural resources are used. This was made in 2012. For those who are not aware, unveiling this country division, it was already a very prophetic moment 2 years ago. This is one of the most hottest points of the Mozambican political scene nowadays. I would like to share with you another point of view I have on these questions of nationalism. I see it always as a concept, a resource that you use to contain, to dominate the other, emphasizing the me or the us. My experience tells me that when we deconstruct this me or this us, we reduce the power of nationalism. And it can be very efficient when we need to handle situations, tension situations between differents. The temporary occupations ended last year, April last year, with a documental exhibition in Lisbon. The community, the artistic community, took the old metropolis and they occupied a very emblematic building in Lisbon, the Gulbenkian Foundation. Now the project is ended. The main goal of temporary occupations was always the discussion. Now it's time for new projects, new discussions. The artists do it. They take occupations as a reference. I'm no longer working on it, but I keep in touch with them, and that's a great honor. Thank you.
So you worked in both Mozambique and
Cape
Portugal.
Verde and Portugal, yes.
Okay, Cape Verde. I think what is interesting about your presentation is that you have this two perspectives on nationalism, maybe. Mm-hmm. Nationalism of the Portuguese as
the colon,
the
discoverers.
Of imperial nationalism, but a confident nationalism, arrogant nationalism.
Yes.
Nationalism that says we are open to everybody because they'll be in their place, but they can come here and be part of this. And the post-colonial nationalism tends to be more inward-looking because it's pushing the occupier out, the foreigner out, the others out. And yet I see today that the former imperial, the big tribes of Europe that had confidence and arrogance are acting more like small tribes, nervous and anxious about the others. Do you see that do you see a difference between these two nationalisms, or do you see connections between them? And do you see anything positive in one versus the other?
I think we cannot erase history, so we must face it. And of course, it goes on your skin like a tattoo, so we cannot erase it. But I think we can learn with that, and we can take an advantage, in fact, because this long history makes us, even if it is very, how can I say, strong in the mean way, it's a kind of being next to that countries like Mozambique and Angola and Cape Verde. I could take much more than 10 minutes to explain you why they choose these countries and why we couldn't make it in Angola. So we just have to work on these little gaps because these people are people. So it's not a case of we are the emperors, we are the old owners, and you are the one. We must just, as I said, it's when we deconstruct this me and you that we can find a territory to be together. And that's what I tried to make. And I made it very instinctively. I didn't plan anything. And the artists were very generous because they decided to accept me and work with me. And the best phrase I heard, it was one of the artists said at a certain point, I hardly remember that you are not Mozambican. So this means that we are very close. That's closeness, the word.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
all.